Hey, Ralph here. Been a while since I've done one of these. Thought I'd get back in the swing of things. Welcome back to the RHCSA tip of the week. My plan is to talk about software packaging. So this one should not take very long. I know I say that at the beginning of all my presentations, and then they always end up taking longer than I think. But let's start by looking at the objectives here that are actually going to be measured on the exam. And really what we have, install and update software packages from the Red Hat network, a remote repository, local file system. So, I mean, ultimately, this is definitely a task that you're going to need to know how to do if you're going to administer systems. It's sort of one of those core competencies when I talk about certain things that you obviously need to be able to do if you want to try and pass the RHCSA exam. You know, things like networking. If you can't do networking, you're not going to be able to do firewalling. You're not going to be able to do remote services. So you got to know networking, hands down. You got to know how to get root access. If you don't know how to get root access, then you're not going to be able to administer the system. You're not going to be able to accomplish tasks. You got to know how to manage software. If you're going to have to work with software and that software is not currently present on the system, then you're going to have to know how to get that software on the system. So this is one of those core competencies. It's not a very difficult thing, something that we should be able to knock out pretty quickly and build up that level of understanding, but it's certainly a core type of competency. So that's the main thing is like, all right, how do we work with our utilities, RPM and YUM, and what is a repository and where is that information stored? And the other thing that we're going to look at a little bit would be obviously the RPM tool. The second sort of package related objective here, you know, we have update the kernel package appropriately to ensure a bootable system. A bootable system is certainly very important to production work as well as the exam environment. Pretty hard to pass the exam if your system doesn't boot. But you know, when it says update the kernel package appropriately to ensure a bootable system, most of this is fairly well automated in the world of RHEL. The kernel package, I guess the one note I would say, and I never really, this has been an objective for a long time, and I never understood. I mean, it's a fairly simple objective in the sense that the kernel actually allows you to have multiple versions installed. Okay, so it's sort of that. It's a fairly unique package in that way, in the sense that, you know, you do not have to remove the existing kernel package in order to install the new kernel, and you'll have both kernels installed on the system at the same time. So maybe that's the point of understanding that they're going after there, that unlike most packages, which will only allow you to have one version of the package installed on the system, the kernel will actually allow you to have multiple versions. So don't uninstall your old kernel to install your new kernel as a general rule. You are allowed to have multiple versions of the kernel installed on the system at the same time. So I guess that's, you know, where they're going with that particular objective. But let's just take a quick tour of software. So come out here to my demo system. Let me just bump this up to full screen. Give ourselves a little bit of real estate. I'm going to hit enter a few times because sometimes Google likes to put a little icon up there that can kind of cover up the work that I'm doing. So, all right. So there are, I mean, honestly, there's really just two tools that we're going to look at here. We're going to look at RPM and we'll also look at the YUM tool. So Red Hat, CentOS, SUSE Linux, for that matter, are all what we call, you know, RPM-based systems. Okay, so RPM is the old Red Hat package manager, and so just like, you know, like in the Windows world where we have the Windows installer service, this is a service, if you will, that manages the installation, the removal, the management of software installed onto the system. So instead of, I mean, if you go back to the old days where we built everything off source, you know, there was inconsistency in terms of how software was deployed. And so one of the the goals of any package management system. And so we're dealing with RPM as a package management system is to provide, that consistency to the management, the installation, the removal, the upgrading of packages on the system. So when you install a package through Yum, information is going to be added to the RPM database, and so that we can then query that database for information on our packages. Now, RPM as a tool these days, from my perspective, is primarily something that I would use for querying the system. So querying the RPM database, or querying an existing file, or querying a package that I downloaded. Mostly I use RPM in the context of as a querying tool. Now, can you use RPM to remove packages? Can you use RPM to install packages? Sure. But Yum does a much better job of doing things like resolving dependencies. When you install a package with RPM, you may get an error message. It may fail because the package requires or has dependencies. And with Yum will go out and check to see if it already has the dependencies in its repository and tell you, hey, if you're going to install this particular piece of software, you also need these, and it's just automated and it's cleaner and it's smoother. But let's start by looking at RPM. Obviously, all these utilities have man pages if you want more depth. I'm going to start a interactive sudo session. So let me go ahead and self-authenticated here. So with RPM, you run the RPM utility, and obviously with any of these utilities, there's access via help or man pages. But as I mentioned before, normally I would use RPM in the context of a querying tool. Now, so if I do RPM minus Q, that'll be to query. And the simplest query, I guess, would be RPM minus QA. RPM minus QA will give me a list of all of my packages. Now, if I use RPM and specify the package, so if I say RPM minus Q, and then let's just say, my login manager, then it will give me the package. Now, you'll notice that these packages have a syntax. So we have the package, we have some versioning information, we have the architecture that's associated with the package. But when you reference a package through Yum or through RPM, you don't have to provide the major minor versioning information and architecture, just the name of the package. Now, so if I have a package like this, and continuing on in this vein of querying, we have some different query options. The one I use probably the most would be L. RPM minus QL will query for a list of files associated with a particular package, and there's a lot of files in that particular package. Let's do an RPM minus QA, and let's grep that for SSH. You see, these are the SSH packages that are installed, and maybe we'll get a few less files here if we say RPM minus QL for open SSH. All right, a little bit shorter list. But what are the types of things that I'm looking for when I, do an RPM QL? Well, I'm looking for, the files that are located in Etsy, which would be the configuration files. That's most typically what I'm looking for to find out, what files are associated with the particular package. So QA would query the entire RPM database, return a list. QL is files. RPM minus QI is your info. Honestly, I probably use that more in demonstrations in class than I do in any sort of production work that I have, but it gives me information about the package, the name of the package, the version, URL, vendor, those types of things. So you can also use RPM to query a existing file on the system. So if I say RPM minus QF, F for file, and then let's say Etsy Samba SMB.conf. Okay, and that'll return the package that that file is part of. So there we have the, it's part of the Samba common package. Now, if I change directories out here to Enterprise Linux 1 samples, and I do an ls for RPM files here, you'll see here that I do have some local RPM files. Okay, I've got one for dstat, one for corn shell. So I can actually query against the local file. You know, if I say RPM minus QP, okay. So we were querying before a file that was installed on the system. So we use QF. This time I'm querying an existing package. So let's say QIP. Okay, I want the info from the package and then the KSH package that's installed. Okay, and so I get the info, or I could do, you know, I could do a QLP as well to get a list of files. Now, RPM does allow for installation. You know, I can do a RPM minus, and then I would be installed. Most people use like a cap U because that's an upgrade. So if the I will fail if the package, an earlier version of the package is already installed. Cap U will update the package. I'm pretty sure I don't have corn shell installed yet, so I'll just say RPM minus ISH, or excuse me, IHV. Okay, install hash verbose on my KSH package, and it installs. Now, if I do a RPM minus QA on corn shell, so let's spell that correctly, you'll see that that version of corn shell is installed. You can use RPM to erase a package, remove a package from the system. RPM minus E, KSH. And then if I rerun my query, you'll see that KSH is no longer installed. Now I'm going to go ahead and reinstall it real quick. I'm going to use that a little bit later as well. But that's RPM. You know, and like I said, can you install? Can you remove packages with it? Sure, you can. It works. But these days, I see it more as a querying tool. Now, the other tool here would be Yum. So Yum is the old yellow dog update manager, and Yum is a front end basically for RPM. Yum uses repositories, so it is connected via some file protocol. It could be a local directory, it could be FTP, you know, but there's some repository, and you can run different commands with Yum. So if I say Yum list, then you'll notice that that as a raw listing will just give me a listing of all the packages that it knows about. Okay, and then also the location of the package. So you see that column right here where it says that's part of the local repo. Now, if I want to, I mean, I can say Yum list installed. I can also say Yum search. So I could search for, you know, a particular string, like I search for Samba. It does support, you know, wildcards, obviously. So globbing. So I can say, you know, Yum list Samba star. Oops. And I should get pretty much the same list there. So Yum search would search on a string. Yum list. It does support wildcards. I don't necessarily recommend that in production as use some sort of, but if you're trying to get things done, you know, quickly, and I wanted to install all of the Samba packages, you know, I could say Yum install Samba star, and that would actually go out and install all the packages. Now, you'll notice here that these are the packages that it wants to install, and these are the packages that begin with that string Samba. But it also says installing for dependencies. So packages are often dependent on other packages, and with RPM, when you try to install a package and the dependency is not installed, you know it fails. Whereas Yum is going to go out, and if the dependencies are available in the repositories that it has, going to give you, going to tell you that, hey, you also need to install these dependencies as well. And then you'll notice I'm queried. for do I want to do that down at the bottom. Might be a little hard to see there, but it says, is this okay? And if I say yes, it goes out and installs the packages. So Yum's very easy to use. The syntax for using Yum is going to be Yum if I want to install a package. Now, a lot of people will do Yum minus Y, and that just says answer yes to any of the questions. So you don't get that prompt there after it goes out and collects the information from the repository. But I can say Yum minus Y, install tmux, and that will install the tmux package. Now, notice it just installed it. Okay. Now, if I do a RPM minus Q for tmux, we'll see that tmux version 1.8 is now currently installed on the system. You can also use Yum as an update tool. And if I just say Yum update and I don't specify any additional information, then there's only one package that's available for update. That version of Corn Shell that I just installed via RPM is actually older than the version that it has in its local repository. And so is that okay? We say yes, and it will update the package. Now, Yum can also be used to remove packages. So Yum remove. My Corn Shell a lot here, but Yum remove KSH. Again, I didn't do the minus Y, so I get prompted. Is this okay? Yes. All right. So, both RPM and Yum for installation, removal, updating packages, fairly straightforward process. And the one thing with Yum, okay, and they do, make note of it on the objectives. So if I come back out of full screen for a second here, is that it says install and update software. All right, we just kind of looked at that particular piece. And then from a Red Hat network and it says a remote repository. So keyword here, repository. What the heck is that? So I've been working with these repositories as I've been using Yum, but it's important, obviously, that we have some understanding about what's going on there. So there's a directory. So can't type today, guys, sorry. Etsy yum.repos.d. And you'll see here that I have repositories. And this is what's allowing Yum to work. I've been using Yum, I've been listing packages, installing packages, everything's been working great, because if I say Yum repo list, I get a list of my repo. So the repositories that I'm currently connected to are one that's in a local file system. Okay. The repository is really just a collection of RPM files that also includes some XML files to talk to Yum, and then FTP repos, NHLS. Okay, so I've got these two repositories. Well, those two repositories we see in that list, are represented as files here in Etsy yum repos.d. So if I cat that local repo file, you'll see here that this is the syntax. So if you needed to create a connection to a repo, this would be the syntax that you would use. So the name, URL, whether or not it's enabled, and then whether or not you're doing GPG checks for signed packages. All right, so what if they're not there? What if I make a directory here, and I'll just call it fail. So I've got this directory fail, and I'm going to go ahead and move start out repo. Repo files have to have that repo extension to my fail directory. All right, everything's gone. Now let's try and use Yum. So we'll start out with a Yum list. All right, that worked. Let's start out with because that's hitting the cache. Now let's do a Yum -y install tstat. Give that a go. All right. The system is not registered. You can use subscription manager. There are no enabled repos. Run yum repo list all to see what repos you have. Yum repo list all. Nothing. Okay. Why? Because there are no files here except the one that Red Hat tried to create there. I moved all my repos out. Okay. So if I'm in that situation, then how do I create, a repository, or more specifically, how do I create a connection to a repository? Now, if I have an existing repo file, then I might be able to use that as a template, but let's say I don't. Okay, so I don't have access to any information. Now, can I just use a text editor, put a .repo extension on a file, and then if I do the syntax right, will it work? Sure. But there is also another tool that we can use. Okay, the one that I want you guys to work with and practice, before you go into the exam. So if I do a man minus K for repo, let's say that. Okay, well, I get a lot more. Let's try a man minus K for yum. All right. So one of the tools that we have available to us, okay, is the yum config manager. And if I pull up the man page for the yum config manager, and you'll notice that one of the options that I have here is the add repo option. So minus add repo, and then the address to the repo. So obviously you still got to know where this repo is. There still has to be a URL, okay, that you're given that says, hey, there is a repository available via FTP or via HTTP at this particular URL. I mean, you still have to have that to have that connectivity to the resource, and you kind of got to know where the resource is in order to use this command. But luckily for me, I do know I have a repo. So if I say yum config manager, and then add repo, and let's say http:// All right, so now you'll see that did what it should have done. It created a repo file for me. And if we take a look at that, so this is what was created by running that command. Okay, so there's the base URL, there's the name, it's enabled. All right, I should be good, right? And so let's try yum install dstat. All right, different error. Okay, but we're making progress here. In this particular case, I failed because the default is it wants to use GPG checking. I don't have that available on the repository. So in this particular case, I'm just going to go ahead and edit the file. So what did we call that? Repo nhls.com. Go down to the end of the file and add the line GPG check equals 0, because I'm just going to turn off GPG checking. Now, one more time here, try to install our dstat package, and we're fixed and we're working again. So the important thing there is that, you have to know how to manage software. And if you're going to, you're going to use yum to manage software. If yum's not connected to any repositories, then the functionality of yum is going to be obviously significantly limited. And so you have to know how to set that up. Okay, whether you just learn the syntax and then you make sure, remember, our directory, yum.repos.d file should have a .repo extension, and then, obviously the appropriate syntax there. I prefer to use yum config manager, add repo. Seems like the easier way to do it, but you certainly could just manually do that by hand as well. So at that point, and again, our objectives here, using RPM and Yum to manage software, configuring and working with repositories. And that really encompasses the package piece. And, it's like I said, it's not real tricky. It's not real difficult, but it is really important. Obviously, both from a production and an exam standpoint, you got to know how to manage software. So I hope that helped, and we'll see you again.